Hello and oh my stars and moon and sun, welcome back to the Shakey Sonnet Show. Here we are at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainder section of an unnamed local library with some lion couchants sitting peaceably on the steps, just waiting for you to pass on by and pay me a visit. Last week we looked into Sonnet 13, which was all about you, and this week we look at Sonnet 14, which is all about I. And no, grammar police, I've not lost my sense of decorum and propriety and proper personal pronoun placement. This Sonnet 14 is all about I, the person who's speaking addresses them or speaks of themselves as I. It's the all-seeing, all-observing, wonderful I that looks on the world and sees the wonder in it. I appears 6 times, and things are heating up in the sonnets. If you're of the mindset that the sonnets are a tale of some sort of relationship, and that the you and the the you and the thou signifies some sort of intensity or cooling of the relationship, then you're of one camp. But actually what the you and the thou mean is never really clear or agreed upon. So we're going to continue to delve into it as we go along. Last week was the first appearance of you. We're back to thous and thys again. It might mean something, it might mean nothing, it might just sound better. But let's look into it. Now, our minds are such that when we're on Sonnet 14, and our minds are such that when we encounter things in proximity or in a sequence, we generally tend to make up a story in order to understand it. It's something that happens without us even being aware of it. And one good example, if you look at the painting by Bruegel of the Fall of Icarus, you'll see all these beautiful images, and down in the little right-hand corner of the painting there are these 2 little white legs splashing into the water, which tells the whole story there. But there are all sorts of other stories going on, and W.H. Auden wrote a poem called Musée des Beaux-Arts, which contemplates just that picture and what may or may not be happening as we go along. And it's an example of how the mind works. If you're interested in that poem, which is a lovely poem, I have done a recitation of that poem in my channel, and I'll link that below. But it's a beautiful poem, and it shows how the mind works when it encounters images in proximity one to the other, or things in a sequence. One other example is if you look at these 2 young lads talking. Now, I'm sure they're having an innocent little conversation, but I've heard all manner of ideas about what they might be discussing, and as far as I'm concerned, they're simply discussing their adoration of Big Willie, which I imagine is their nickname for William Shakespeare, of course. But it goes to my point that things in proximity tend to create a narrative, and our minds look to fill in the spaces of what's not there. And at Sonnet 14, we've got enough behind us to begin making a story for ourselves. So we will continue to look at the poems as separate entities. We'll continue to look at them as possible dramatic exercises, but we'll also be thinking about them as if they are part of a sequence of a story, a greater story of 154 sonnets. And I said last week that I'm going to be looking at the other Elizabethan sonnets cycles during that period to see just how Shakespeare compares to them, if first of all to see how they work in general, and to see how Shakespeare either is similar to them or differs from them in any way. So without further ado, let's get into Sonnet 14, and you'll excuse the beeping and the honking and the yelling and the screaming. Today seems to be a particularly busy day in the Sonnetarium with all sorts of new comings and goings. So if you hear something untoward, just attempt to ignore it and concentrate on Shakespeare. Sonnet 14. Not from the stars do I my judgment pluck, and yet methinks I have astronomy. But not to tell of good or evil luck, of plagues, of dearths, or seasons' quality. Nor can I fortune to brief minutes tell, pointing to each his thunder, rain, and wind, or say with princes if it shall go well, I oft predict that I in heaven find. But from thine eyes my knowledge I derive, and, constant stars, in them I read such art as truth and beauty shall together thrive, if from thyself to store thou wouldst convert. Or else of thee this I prognosticate. Thy end is truth's and beauty's, doom and date. Okay, so we have that lovely, all-observing eye talking to someone, and what exactly is being said. We'll go line by line. Not from the stars do I my judgment pluck, and yet methinks I have astronomy, or astrology. Not from the way that the stars move and the suns move and the moon's position. I'm not looking at what's going to happen based on that, no. But I do know what's going to happen. I don't know, but not to tell of good or evil luck. I don't know if something good is going to happen or something bad is going to happen. Not to tell of plagues, of dearths, or seasons' quality. I can't tell what the weather's going to be. I can't tell if we'll have a plague or if there will be a famine and a dearth of some sort for the crops. Nor can I fortune to brief minutes tell. And here, fortune is a verb, which is a very interesting use of this. Nor can I fortune, nor can I tell a fortune to brief minutes, tiny segments of time. Nor can I fortune to brief minutes tell, pointing to each. Pointing is an abbreviation for appointing, and to each means the minutes. So I can't tell what's going to happen in any particular moment. And I won't point to each particular moment to say if thunder, rain, and wind will occur during those brief moments of time. Nor can I say with princes if it shall go well, if there are going to be boons for princes, if princes will be taking over lands and gathering all sorts of riches. I can't tell that. Especially I can't tell that by oft predict that I in heaven find. And here predict is a noun. Prediction is basically it's an abbreviation for predictions. I can't tell these, I can't give these predictions simply by looking at the heavens. But from your eyes, but from not your eyes, from thine eyes, my knowledge I derive. I can tell what's going to happen simply by looking into your eyes. And your eyes, which are constant stars, they glitter and they shine like no other thing on earth. Constant stars, in them, in your eyes, I read such art as truth and beauty shall together thrive. In your eyes I see truth, in your eyes I see beauty, and they'll live forever if from thyself to store thou wouldst convert. If you'll stop keeping yourself to yourself and put yourself into store, or in other words, into perhaps a baby, that would be a good way to store your treasures, to create a child and to make them live and carry your beauty throughout the ages. If you'll do this, that's the boon that I can see. Or else of this I prognosticate. I can say this if you don't do that. Thy end is truth's and beauty's doom and date. Your truth, your beauty, you will die. You'll be dead. You'll be nothing. You'll be gone. Nobody will see you again. Goodbye. The world is misery. Procreate, please, and help us out. So that's what's happening in Sonnet 14. It's another example of a procreation sonnet, but it's got this all-seeing eye, which is similar to the Sonnet 12, and it's actually one of the better poems that we've seen so far. I would have to say 12 and 14 are my favorites at this point. It's not quite as sad as 12. It's got a nice logic to it. It's got all of the particulars of astronomy and all the things that can happen if you do know how to tell the future, and it draws on that to say, I don't have this kind of magic. You've got the magic. You've got the magic of beauty and truth, and please make it happen. Please let it go forward into the generations, and you'll be doing us all a favor. The one thing I will say is that although it is quite a nice poem, that 12th line, if you're attempting to memorize this, if from thyself to store thou wouldst convert, is a particularly difficult line, or was a particularly difficult line for me to memorize. It just sounds clunky and weird, and you know, it's supposed to convert is supposed to rhyme with art, but it doesn't really, and it's a bit strange. Other people seem to have a problem with that big long prognosticate, but I quite like a big long prognosticate every once in a while. Spices things up, don't you think? So, is this a male or a female that's being addressed? Can we tell by what's here? No, we cannot. What might the dramatic possibilities be? I would say that any sex of any age, as long as the recipient is of childbearing age, it could be flirty or non-sexually solicitous. It could be any number of dramatic situations. It doesn't necessarily have to be any sort of come on, although it could be. It could be a song of woo, because it could be saying, again, lovely, let's go make some babies. It could be that. Is there any hint of homosexuality in it? There is not. This is another of the procreation sonnets, and sitting right up and proud right at the beginning, almost right at the beginning of the sonnet sequence. Don't know what's really happening in the story yet, but we know that when we get to 17, there's going to be a break of certain sorts. 17 will be the last procreation sonnet. There may be a break for us as well if we take a break for the summer, or for an extended period of time while we collect ourselves and consider the rest of the sonnets. But it's quite beautiful. And it's a good example of the all-observing eye, which looks out on the world and sees what's lovely and recognizes what's not lovely as well, and gathers it all together and makes a sonnet out of it. So here's a writer who pays attention to the world. And I recommend, even if you're not a writer, even if you're whatever you are, of the many jobs that are possible to be had, pay attention to what is happening in the world, because it's filled with wonder. Pay attention. Next week we'll talk about 15 and 16. Until then, I'm Tootight Lautrec. Mwah.